Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Double Portion Inheritance Ministries. I'm Maria Merola Wold.
And I'm Gary Wold.
In accordance with 1 Corinthians 9, 7 through 14, after the Sabbath is over, we ask you to prayerfully consider a one-time or recurring donation to www.paypal.com/PayPalMe/DPI Ministries or www.venmo.com/Maria-Merola. You can also use the email address doubleportioninheritance@gmail.com. Today is March 17th, 2024, and I'm going to be going over Daniel's 70-week timeline with you. This is a graphic I made, and it's just kind of like a brief overview of what that looks like as far as my understanding goes. I'm going to first show you how you can go to all my blogs about Daniel's 70th week and the eschatology blogs that I have. First, if you go to my website, it's mariamerola.com, or you can use doubleportioninheritance.com. Either way, it's going to take you to my Blogger account, and you're going to see the landing page. And the first part of this page is just a history about myself and my family, where I was born, growing up, and things like that, my testimony. And at the bottom of the page, you'll see several blogs, and each of these blogs contain other blogs. So as an example, I've written several blogs about the Sabbath. And so if you go to the blog that says blogs about Sabbath keeping, you'll find all the blogs I've ever written about Sabbath keeping. And if you go to this one, which is called blogs about the end times. So I've got several blogs about the end time beast here, who is the beast of Revelation, and, all the blogs I've ever written concerning the beast and the book of Revelation and so forth. And then finally, if you want to understand Daniel's timeline, I recommend going here, blogs about Daniel's 70th week. And so within that blog, I have several blogs that I've written about Daniel's 70th week. And I really recommend this one, Who Confirms the Covenant of Daniel's 70th Week. And this one here, Except Those Days Should Be Shortened. There's several where I go into a lot of detail about Daniel's 70th week. And then finally, there's another blog I have here called Blogs About the Great Tribulation and the Second Coming of Messiah. So I've got blogs here about the pre-trib versus post-trib, Remember Lot's Wife, Taken or Left, Who is the Mysterious Restrainer, Who Withholds the Man of Sin. And so all the blogs concerning the second coming of Messiah are here. Who are the 144,000? Who are the two witnesses? So you'll find all of that here. So I'm going to include these links for you at the bottom of this video. Getting back to Daniel's 70-week timeline, I'm going to first read to you Daniel 9:24. So Daniel 9:24, this is my eSword program. It says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. So I believe that where this begins is with King Cyrus, who issued a decree somewhere between 538 and 537 BC. Now, his decree was not actually enforced until years later under Artaxerxes, who actually enforced the original decree and allowed the Yehudim, the Jewish people, to go back to their land and to rebuild their city and their temple. Now, Artaxerxes, his Persian name is Ahasuerus. That was Queen Esther's husband. But the Greek name is Artaxerxes. Just so you know, it's the same person. So we start here and we add 7 weeks. Now, a week in Hebrew, Shabua, can mean a literal 7-day week, but it can also mean a week of years. We call that either a Shemitah or a Shabua. Okay, so 7 times 7 is 49 years. We also add 62 weeks, which is 62 times 7, which is 434 years. And we come to 483 years. Now, the traditional way that theologians teach this is they teach that there's 7 years reserved for the future. I don't believe that. I believe that our Messiah fulfilled the first half of Daniel's 70th week, leaving the other 3.5 years for the future. So I believe Daniel's 70th week was divided in half. Now, if you take the 483 years and you take, from Artaxerxes 457/458, you add the 483 years of the prophecy, it brings you to 26/27 AD. And the reason I roughly estimated is because we don't know exactly what time of year it was when Artaxerxes enforced the decree. So that's why I just gave a margin of 1 year. Okay. So 26 to 27 AD. We also take into account the fact that Pope Gregory in 1582 removed 10 days from the Julian calendar. So all previous dates were moved back by 1 year. The other thing we need to take into account is that in a biblical prophetic year, there's only 360 days versus our current 365.25 days. That means that when we calibrate the years based on biblical prophecy, we're going to lose approximately 5 days per year. So that's going to alter the timeline somewhat. So I believe that our Messiah began his ministry somewhere in between 27 to 28 AD. The reason I believe that is because the Jewish historian Josephus wrote in his Antiquities that 23 BC was a Jubilee year. So if we add 50 years to 23 BC, it brings us to somewhere around 27/28 AD. Now, we don't count the year 0 because there is no 0 in the transition from BC to AD years. So if we add 3.5 years, which, I know there's a dispute about the 3.5 years. The reason I believe our Messiah's ministry did last for 3.5 years is because right here in Luke's gospel, Luke chapter 4, when our Messiah finished his 40-day fast, he went to the synagogue and he preached the acceptable year. Whenever you see this phrase, the acceptable year of Yahuwah, that is an indicator that this was a Jubilee year. It probably started in the 49th year, and by the end of that year, it was the 50th year. So when he got done reading this prophecy, he went on to tell us in Luke 4:25 that his ministry would be like that of the prophet Eliyahu. And he goes on to explain that Elijah's ministry lasted for 3 years and 6 months. He also used a metaphor here, in case some people haven't picked up on it. He's comparing his ministry to the prophet Elijah's 3.5-year ministry. The widow whose house he went to, she represents the nation of Israel. Remember, in Isaiah 54, the nation of Israel was likened to a widow. And then finally, the widow had a son who died. It was her only son, her firstborn son, and he died. At the end of that 3.5 years, Elijah the prophet prayed over this boy and he was resurrected. Okay, so this is how we know that our Messiah was telling us that his ministry was going to last 3.5 years, exactly the same length as the prophet Elijah. All right, getting back to the graphic. We begin the decree right here with Cyrus issuing the decree. Of course, that's not where the timing begins. The timing begins with Artaxerxes, who enforced Cyrus's decree in 457. So we start the clock ticking at 457 BC. That's where the 7 weeks begins with Artaxerxes. So that would be the 7 weeks plus the 62 weeks. Okay. So the 7 weeks plus the 62 weeks is the sum of 49 years plus 434 years, which is 483 years. So from 483, we subtract 457, and that brings us to the year 26/27 AD. But I believe our Messiah probably began his ministry somewhere between 27 and 28 AD, simply because, like I said, a biblical year is 360 days. Whenever we calculate prophecy, we go by a 360-day year, which is 12 30-day cycles. That's different than our 365-day year. So it's going to alter the prophecy by 5 days per year. So that's going to shorten things. So then we add a 3.5-year ministry. As I've already said, his ministry matched that of the prophet Elijah's ministry. And that would bring us to Passover 30 AD, when he would have died on the tree. So the 69 weeks, the first 69 weeks takes us from the decree that Artaxerxes enforced, and it takes us right up until the beginning of our Messiah's ministry, probably somewhere between 26 to 28 AD. I believe he probably began his ministry in 27 AD, which was the beginning of the Jubilee, but it ended at 28 AD. So right here I say Messiah began 3.5-year ministry on Yom Kippur after baptism / 40-day fast. It was a Jubilee year between 26 to 27 AD. And of course, I believe that was the 49th year. By the time he completed the 49th year, that would have taken him to 28 AD. Okay. This is called the acceptable year of Yahuwah, Luke 4:18 through 20. All right, so he already fulfilled the first half of Daniel's 70th week. Passover 30 AD, Messiah was cut off, it says, in the midst of Daniel's 70th week. Not only was it in the middle of the literal Passover week, which would have been the 4th day of the week, what we would today call Wednesday, but it was also in the middle of the 7 years. And it was also in the middle of the 7,000 years, because he came to us in the 4th millennium. As a matter of fact, when he went into the synagogue and preached the Isaiah 61 scroll, that was in the year 4000 from creation. I don't have time to show you that graph, but I will in another video. So he was crucified and resurrected after 3.5 years. Then there's a 2,000-year gap here. You see the green box. The green box represents a 2,000-year gap, which the Apostle Shaul or Paul calls the fullness of the Gentiles. Now, when Jacob prayed over his grandson, Ephraim, which is in Genesis 48:19, he said that Ephraim would be the multitude of nations. In Hebrew, that phrase multitude of nations is melo hagoyim, which means the very same thing as fullness of the Gentiles. So when Paul used the phrase fullness of the Gentiles in Romans 11:25, he was actually repeating the prophecy of Genesis 48:19, which is multitude of nations, melo hagoyim. In Isaiah 61:1 through 2, we see that our Messiah read only half of this verse. He only read half of Isaiah 61 verse 2, where he says that he's come to preach the acceptable year of Yahuwah. But the latter half of the verse, where it says, in the day of vengeance of our Elohim, that half of the verse is reserved for the future when he comes back. And this is an illustration of him coming back on a white horse. In Revelation 19, it says he's coming back on the day of vengeance to avenge the blood of his saints. And then in Ezekiel 4:4 through 6, we learned that Ezekiel laid on his right side for the sins of Judah, and he was told to lay on his left side for the sins of Israel. However, after those years of punishment were completed, with Israel going through the Assyrian captivity and Judah going through the Babylonian captivity, they still had not repented of their sin. So according to Leviticus 25, when they don't repent of their sin, their punishment must be multiplied by 7. So when we multiply the years of punishment by 7, it takes us to our present day, which would take us to the year 1948, where Israel became a nation again. Okay, so adding up the years from when Israel came back into the land and rebuilt their city and their sanctuary and taking it to 1948. And as a matter of fact, May 14th, 1948 is the exact date that Ezekiel's days of laying on his left side and his right side were completed. And I don't have time to go into the graph, but I will show that to you in another video. Okay, so here there's a 2,000-year gap. And then, like I said, I believe that the latter 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week picks up with the 2 witnesses beginning their ministry. Now, what kicks off their ministry? Well, this year, I believe that by Passover 2024, we're expecting that the red heifers are going to be sacrificed. The red heifers are about to be 3 years old soon. They can't exceed 3 years old. They must be somewhere between 2.5 to 3 years old. The red heifers, I'm expecting, and a lot of people are expecting, to be sacrificed by Passover 2024 or somewhere thereabouts. Now, that means that possibly we're hearing rumors that by November of this year, the temple is going to be being constructed. From what I've understood, they can have it built within 6 months. I'm guessing that by Passover 2025, the temple will be standing, and by then, they will have already begun the morning and the evening sacrifices. And it's entirely possible that by Passover 2025, we're going to see the abomination that causes desolation, which will kick off the ministry of the 2 witnesses, which should last for 1,260 days, according to Revelation chapter 11. So the abomination that causes desolation is set up for 1,290 days, according to Daniel 12:11. And the image of the beast is also mentioned there in Revelation 13:14 through 15. It's the same thing. The abomination that causes desolation is the same thing as the image of the beast. I'm thinking that it's probably going to be an AI of some kind of image powered by artificial intelligence. Our Messiah told us here in Matthew 24:15 through 21, he said, "For when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet," he says, "for then shall be great tribulation." So I believe that is when the great tribulation begins. In 2 Thessalonians 2:3 through 4, we are told that the man of sin, the son of perdition, will reveal himself at that time. We are told in Revelation 13:14 through 15, that there's going to be an image made to the beast. So this is when the second half of Daniel's 70th week begins. It's for 3.5 years. It's going to be exactly 3.5 years, but it's 42 months, 42 times 30 lunar cycles. And in other places in scripture, it's called a time, times, and a half times. A time in Hebrew is moed. It means 1 year, one annual cycle of 7 festivals. Times is 2 years. A half times is 6 months. So we believe that the 2 witnesses will begin their ministry the moment we see the abomination that causes desolation. That's when the 2 witnesses will begin to prophesy against the beast. So the beast will have a false ministry that lasts for 42 months. He's going to be speaking blasphemies against the Most High. Concurrently, the 2 witnesses are going to be speaking out against him, preaching against him, and prophesying against him. Okay, so I believe the fall feasts of 2028 could very well be a Jubilee year. As I've already said, Josephus, the Jewish historian, wrote in his Antiquities that 23 BC was a Jubilee year. We add 50 years That brings us to when our Messiah would have began his ministry in 27 AD. By the end of that year, that would have been 28 AD. So I believe that our Messiah's first year of his ministry was between 27 AD and 28 AD. That was the first year of his ministry. And then if we add 40 more Jubilees to that, which is 2,000 years, that would bring us to the year 2028. Not only that, but if we go by the fig tree prophecy, remember our Messiah said the fig tree was going to begin to blossom. And that would be the harbinger. That would be the sign that he's coming back within one generation. Well, how long is a generation? We are told in Psalms 90, verse 10, that a generation is 80 years long. Okay. 90, verse 10. It says, the days of our years are 80 years and 10. That's 70 years. And if by reason of strength they be 80 years, that's 80 years, yet is their strength labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. So for those that say there's no rapture, well, it's post-trib, not pre, but right here it says we're going to fly away. Okay, so those that say there's no rapture, yes, the bride's going to be caught up to meet him in the air after the 3.5 years. When the two witnesses are killed at the end of their 3.5 year ministry, they are taken up to heaven. Scripture tells us. So yes, there's going to be a post-tribulation catching away to heaven. Okay. And so now we're going to go back to the graphic. So I believe the Feast of Trumpets is the post-tribulation harpazo. Now I know the word rapture does not appear in our English Bibles. It's a Latin word, but it means the identical thing as harpazo. The word harpazo means to seize, to snatch, to take by force, to carry away. So this is how it was done in ancient Hebrew weddings. The bridegroom would come at midnight and he would literally kidnap his bride. He would take her to himself, okay, in an intimate way. As a matter of fact, the word taken in the parable where Yahushua talks about those that are taken and those that are left, the word taken in Hebrew and also in the Greek language, in both languages, it means to take into marriage. That word taken means to take into marriage, to be taken in an intimate way. But the word left literally means to forsake, to reject. Okay, so the word left is not in a good context. Okay, so those that are now teaching that they want to be left behind and there is no such thing as a rapture, you've gone too far the other extreme. Yes, there's no pre-trib rapture. That's true. The Christian church has gotten that wrong. But now a lot of people within the Hebraic community are overcorrecting and saying there's no rapture and they do want to get left behind. That's also overcorrecting and going too far the other extreme. So I believe that after the 3.5 year ministry of the two witnesses, when they are killed, they are caught up to meet our Messiah in the air. That's going to be on the Feast of Trumpets. Then 10 days later, on the Day of Atonement, they come back on white horses with our Messiah, and the bride is going to be his army. And here I say, Messiah returns to the Mount of Olives on Yom Kippur with his bride as his army. Now, some people have objected to that, but Ezekiel 37:10 tells us that those who get resurrected out of their graves is the army, an exceeding great army, the whole house of Israel. Revelation 19:7 through 14 says that the bride has made herself ready and that she is clothed in white linen, fine and clean. And it's the white linen, fine and clean that the saints are wearing. And then in Hebrews 12:18 through 23 tells us that our Messiah is returning with a company of angels and saints. Let's go there. Hebrews chapter 12:18. And it says, for you are not come unto the mount that might be touched and that burned with fire, nor unto blackness and darkness and tempest. Because, some people teach that the bride is going to be whisked off to Mount Sinai again. No, we're not going back there. In fact, the apostle Shaul or Paul says in Galatians chapter 4:26 that Mount Sinai is likened to Hagar and bondage. That's where they worship the golden calf and they place themselves back under bondage again by worshiping the golden calf, so that we're not going back there again. And it says, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, which voice they had heard, entreated that the word should not be spoken to them any more. For they could not endure that which was commanded, and if so much as a beast touch the mountain, it shall be stoned or thrust through with a dart. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. But you are come unto Mount Zion, and unto the city of the living Elohim, the heavenly Jerusalem. Some people think we're going back to the earthly Jerusalem, but not until the bride first goes to the heavenly Jerusalem for the consummation of the wedding, which only lasts for 7 days. The 7 days are situated inside the 10 days of awe. Okay, so we are going to be taken to the heavenly Jerusalem, and it says to an innumerable company of angels. So that's where the bride is going for 10 days during the 10 days of awe. Remember, Revelation 2:10 says that Smyrna must suffer tribulation for 10 more days. After the bride is taken on the Feast of Trumpets, the other half of the bride, the foolish virgins that didn't have the oil in their lamps, they will be left behind for 10 more days, but they will have the opportunity to buy the oil during those 10 days of awe or those 10 days of tribulation. And when Messiah returns, and he's got his whole company, his whole army with him, which is his bride, they're going to be standing at the Mount of Olives and waiting. Those foolish virgins who didn't make it here will be waiting for him here at the Mount of Olives. So the wise virgins consist of the corporate 2 witnesses. I believe the 2 witnesses are not just 2 individuals, but it's 2 groups of people. They are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks. In other words, the 2 houses of Israel, and they're overcoming the 2 overcoming assemblies, which are Philadelphia and Smyrna. They are going to be part of this corporate 2 witness group, and they are going to be killed at the end of their 1,260 days, and then they are going to be caught up to heaven. That's the bride. They're going to be taken to the heavenly chuppah on the Feast of Trumpets. 1 Thessalonians 4:17 says we are going to be caught up to meet him in the air. 1 Corinthians 15:51 through 54 says we are going to be changed in a twinkling of an eye. We're going to be putting on incorruption. Hebrews 12:8 through 23, I just read to you that we are going to the heavenly Jerusalem, an innumerable company of saints. We are going to be meeting up with the other saints who've died before us. Revelation 11:11 through 15 says that when the 2 witnesses are killed, they heard a voice from heaven saying, come up here. And it says they are taken up to heaven. Then you go to the next chapter, Revelation 12:5. It says that the one new man, the man-child, which is the one new man, the 2 corporate witnesses that are resurrected, they are caught up to heaven and to the throne. To the throne. This means the third heaven. The third heaven. Okay? And then when Messiah returns with his bride, Messiah wages war on Yom Kippur against the beast and his army for 30 days. Okay? Until the 1,290 days. See, and then at the end of the 1,290 days, the abomination of desolation will be removed. So this is 30 days beyond the post-tribulation rapture. Okay? So for 30 more days after the post-tribulation harpazo, when Messiah returns with his bride as his army, we're going to be fighting against the beast. And then after that, our Messiah will build the tabernacle of David. It says he will rebuild the tabernacle of David. Scripture tells us that. And that brings us to the 1,335 days, which will be Hanukkah. That'll be the 24th day of the 9th month, according to Haggai, the prophecy of Haggai, verse 18 through 20. That is Hanukkah, the feast of dedication. Messiah will dedicate the renewed tabernacle that he builds. And that brings us to the 1,335 days. So here we have the tabernacle of David that Messiah is going to rebuild. And I believe that that's also going to be the same thing as the Ezekiel temple. It's probably going to start out as just a tabernacle, which is like a tent, but then it's going to be a permanent structure built after that, which is the Ezekiel temple. So that is how I see Daniel's timeline unfolding from where the angel told Daniel from Daniel 9:24 right up until the angel told Daniel 70 weeks are determined upon your people. That's 49 years. And then he says to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins. Now, some people teach that all of Daniel's 70th week's been fulfilled already. I know that Seventh-day Adventists teach that. But here's the problem. It says to make an end of sins. Well, people are still sinning, okay? So that hasn't been completed yet. To make reconciliation for iniquity. Yes, our Messiah has done that. He has made reconciliation for iniquity. To bring in everlasting righteousness. Well, that hasn't begun yet. We're not living in everlasting righteousness yet. To seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Well, the most holy is the Holy of Holies. And that happens when? In the 8th millennium, in Revelation chapter 21, okay? When the new heaven and the new earth comes down, that's when all of Daniel's 70th week will be completed. And right here, it tells us there's not going to be a temple any longer. No brick and mortar temple, for Yahuwah Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. So all these things must be fulfilled, and they haven't been yet. So for those that say Daniel's 70th week has already been finished, it cannot be, because otherwise we would already be living in everlasting righteousness. Nobody would be sinning anymore. Okay, it says to make an end of sins. People are still committing sins. And then it says, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem, that was Cyrus who brought forth that command, but it didn't get enforced until Artaxerxes, unto the Messiah the Prince. Well, who's the Messiah the Prince? That's the real Messiah, not the anti-Messiah. The real Messiah, right up until he began his ministry, okay, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 7 weeks is 49 years. 62 weeks is 62 years. It tells us the street shall be built again and the wall even in troublous times. That was during the days of Nehemiah the prophet when they rebuilt the walls. And then it says, and after 62 weeks, 62 weeks is 62 weeks. So after they rebuilt Jerusalem, after 62 weeks, Messiah was cut off. He was cut off. That means that was when he was crucified, but not for himself. In other words, he wasn't the sinner. He wasn't cut off because he deserved it. He was cut off for us sinners. And the people of the prince, who's that? That's the Roman armies of General Titus. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Well, that was in 70 AD. That was 40 years after our Messiah was crucified, after he gave the prophecy that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So the Roman siege ended with a flood. They flooded the city of Jerusalem. And then it goes on and says, and he shall confirm. Well, guess what? The word he is not there, okay? If you look up this in Hebrew, it just says confirm, which means to strengthen. So in other words, the covenant shall be confirmed. That's all it says in Hebrew. The covenant shall be confirmed. There's no he there. This isn't describing an Antichrist leader. It just says the covenant shall be confirmed with many for 1 week. Well, what week is that talking about? That would have been Passover week. In the middle of that week, in the midst of the week, our Messiah, he held up the cup the night before he died and said, this is the blood of my covenant shed for many, many. So the covenant was strengthened. What covenant was that? That was the Abrahamic covenant. Look at what it says. The Hebrew word for covenant is berit. It means a compact because or made by passing between pieces of flesh. Well, I don't see anything in Scripture about an Antichrist leader making a covenant by passing between pieces of flesh. If it ends up being a peace treaty, fine, but that doesn't describe a berit. That's not the same kind of covenant where Yahuwah passes between pieces of flesh. So he is not talking about an Antichrist leader. I believe it's the true Messiah, Yahushua, who confirmed, who strengthened the Abrahamic covenant. Not only was it during Passover week, but it was also during the last 7 years of Daniel's 70th week. And in the middle of that 7 years, which is after 3.5 years of ministry, in the middle of that 7 years, in the middle of the week, but it was also in the middle of the 7 days as well, because he died on the 4th day of the week. In the midst of the week, he is the one who caused the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Now, they continued to perform animal sacrifices for 40 more years, but the word cease means to cause to fail. So in other words, even though they were performing them, the Father in heaven wasn't recognizing them. On Yom Kippur, once per year, there was something called the 40-year miracle, Yom Kippur miracle, which is recorded in the Jewish Talmud. It says that for 40 consecutive years, every time the high priest would present the Yom Kippur sacrifice, the black stone came up every year, which meant that they were not forgiven. The red ribbon failed to turn from red to white. The temple doors kept swinging open by themselves, and it was blowing out the fire on the altar. So even though the sacrifices continued for 40 more years from the time that our Messiah died, they ceased, not in the sense that they stopped performing them, but they ceased in the sense that the Father wasn't recognizing them. Why? Because Yahushua is the only one who can sanctify the altar. He represents the ashes of the red heifer, and it's only his blood that can sanctify the altar. And since they rejected him as the Passover lamb, and they also rejected him as the red heifer who sanctifies the altar, therefore their altar was defiled for the next 40 years. So because of the overspreading of abominations, in other words, because for those 40 consecutive years after he was crucified, they continued with the abominations, because they weren't accepting his sacrifice. He who made it desolate, our Messiah, when he said, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who stone all the prophets that have been sent to you. How many times I wanted to gather you as a mother hen gathers her chickens, but you would not come to me." And then he said, "Behold, your house is left desolate." So he shall make it desolate even until the consummation, right up until the end, when the consummation of the wedding takes place in heaven with the bride and the groom, even until that consummation. Then Jerusalem shall continue to be desolate until Messiah comes back, and the war between the beast and Messiah and his bride will take place. Right up until that point, it'll continue to be desolate. And then in Daniel chapter 12, we are told from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, that's what kicks off the Great Tribulation, is that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate will be set up in its place. That'll be what I believe is the image of the beast from Revelation 13, 14, and 15. It'll probably be a giant statue of some kind powered by artificial intelligence. So there shall be 1,290 days. So 30 days beyond when the two witnesses are killed and taken to heaven. So 30 more days after that, the abomination will continue to stand there until Messiah returns. And then it says, "Blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1,335 days." So after the war is over between the beast and his army and Messiah and his bride, then we're going to add 45 days to that. And it's going to take that long to cleanse the temple and the altar. And then Messiah is going to set up the tabernacle of David, which will be like a temporary structure, like a tent. And that's going to bring us to the 1,335 days, which is going to land on Hanukkah. Hanukkah stands for dedication. And so that's how I see all of this unfolding here in this timeline.
Yahuwah bless you and keep you. Yahuwah make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Yahuwah lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. We hope you've enjoyed today's broadcast and that you are encouraged in your walk with Messiah. For more teachings, subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified of our latest content. Visit Maria's many blogs at doubleportioninheritance.com. That's doubleportioninheritance.com. This ministry is made possible by the prayers and support of listeners like you. To make a donation by PayPal or Venmo.com, use the email address doubleportioninheritance@gmail.com. That's doubleportioninheritance@gmail.com. On behalf of Maria and Gary at Double Portion Inheritance Ministries, may Yahuwah bless you.